The banners were still moving when he found me. There's a particular sound a hangar makes on a homecoming morning, and if you have never stood inside it, you would not believe how big it is. 200 families packed onto a painted concrete deck, a brass band somewhere near the doors, playing the same 4 songs it always plays, children on shoulders waving small paper flags, and behind all of it, the deep tick and sigh of jet engines cooling after a long flight home. I had brought the last aircraft in myself that morning, taxied it to the line, and shut it down with my own hand on the throttle. 7 months at sea were folding closed behind me like a hatch, and for about 90 seconds, walking in off the flight line in my flight suit with my helmet bag on my shoulder. I let myself believe I was simply a person coming home. 90 seconds. That is about how long it lasted. I had spent 7 months learning to measure time in the small, careful increments that keep aircraft and people alive. Fuel states and cycle times and the number of minutes a crew has been awake. And I can tell you with a professional's confidence that my homecoming lasted about 90 seconds before it turned into something else. I had climbed down the ladder. I had let a plane captain take my helmet bag and then taken it back, because old habits do not care that you are the skipper. I had breathed in the smell of the place, jet fuel and cold concrete, and someone's perfume and the particular green smell of the country I had not stood on since the winter. And I had looked for my family in the crowd, the way you do, scanning faces, and I had found them, and for one more second I had let myself hope. Then my father crossed the deck toward me, and I understood he had come to get his version of the day in first. He did not hug me. He took my arm above the elbow, the way you take hold of a child who has wandered, and he turned me a quarter turn so the people nearest us could see his face, and then mine. "There she is," he said, and he said it loudly, pitched to Carrie, the voice he used at the dinner table when he wanted the whole family to stop and listen. 42 years old, still living off the rest of us, still playing dress-up. He let a small, tired laugh into it, the laugh that had been the soundtrack of my entire life. "You're a parasite, Claire. You have embarrassed this family long enough." He said it so the whole hangar could hear. I want you to understand that I had flown across an ocean to be in that room. I had signed the last page of a 7-month deployment and put 12 aircraft and 200 sailors to bed. And the first words spoken to me on American soil were those. I set my helmet bag down on the concrete. I did not pull my arm away. I did not raise my voice. I had learned, a long time before that morning, that raising my voice in front of my father was a way of handing him the win. Around us the noise thinned, not all at once. It went the way a wave goes out, a little at a time, the people closest to us going quiet first, and the quiet spreading in a ring. My mother was 3 steps behind him, with her purse held in both hands against her stomach, and she looked at the floor. My sister Meredith stood beside her, and on Meredith's face was the small, embarrassed half-smile of a person who has decided the safest thing to do is nothing. Nobody moved to help me. I had learned a long time ago that they would not. So I stood there with my father's hand on my arm and the whole bright, roaring, banner-strung hangar going still around us, and I waited, the way you wait out weather, for the moment to pass. It did not pass. From somewhere off to my right, near the tool cribs and the yellow line where the maintenance world begins, a single voice cut across the entire hangar. It was not loud the way my father's voice was loud. It was trained. It came up from the chest and it carried without effort, and it was the voice of a man who had spent 30 years being heard, overturning engines. Attention on deck, and the floor began to move. To understand what happened in the next 90 seconds, you have to know who my father thought he was holding by the arm, and who he was actually holding. He thought he was holding the daughter who threw her future in a ditch. That was the story. And the story was old and comfortable, and the whole family had furnished their house with it. In the story, Claire had been the smart one, the one who could have been a surgeon, and Claire had thrown it away to go, in my father's words, play soldier, and Claire had spent 20 years since then doing something vague and menial in a uniform, pushing paper on a boat, living off the taxpayer, coming home at holidays to be tolerated. Here is who he was actually holding. For the 7 months just ended, I had been the commanding officer of a United States Navy strike fighter squadron. The skipper, the single name on the bottom of the flight schedule, and the single name on the bottom of every letter that a squadron ever has to write to a family at home, the letters no one wants to receive and no one wants to sign. 200 sailors worked for me. 12 FA-18 Super Hornets belonged to my command. When any of those aircraft flew, they flew because I had decided they were ready and the crews were ready and the weather and the mission and the risk all balanced on the correct side of a line that only I was allowed to draw. That morning I had led the fly in myself. My wingman on the recovery was a lieutenant named Priya Nair, 26 years old, 3 years in the cockpit, one of the best natural pilots I have ever flown next to. We had crossed the beach in a loose formation with the sun coming up behind us, and she had keyed the radio once, off the record, just to say, "Welcome home, skipper," and I had not trusted my own voice to answer for a second. Then I had brought the jet down onto the runway, taxied to the line, and climbed down the ladder into the roar of my own homecoming. Let me tell you what the last morning of a deployment actually looks like, because it is nothing like the movies, and it is the truest picture I can give you of the person my father had by the arm. We had launched off the ship before dawn for the fly-in, the transit from the carrier to the beach that a squadron makes when the deployment is finally, genuinely over. I had briefed it myself the night before, standing in front of my aircrew in the ready room with a grease pencil and a chart, going over the join-up and the fuel and the weather and the divert fields. Because a fly-in is the last chance a deployment has to hurt you, and I have known good people to die on the last day. When you are the commanding officer, the last day frightens you more than the first, because you can see the finish line, and so can everyone else. And a finish line makes people careless, and careless is the thing that kills aviators. So I briefed it hard. I made them brief it back to me. And then before dawn, we walked to the jets in the dark and the cold and the wind coming across the flight deck, and I did what I always did, which was stop at the bottom of my ladder for one breath and put my hand flat on the cold skin of the aircraft, the way you might touch the shoulder of a horse you trust, and then I climbed up and strapped in. The catapult shot in the dark is a violence you never quite get used to. 0 to 140 knots in the length of a swimming pool, the whole world slamming into your spine, and then the sudden clean silence of flight. And then the sun came up over the water, and one by one my aircraft joined on me out of the 12 gray shapes sliding into place off my wing, and Priya Nair tucked into my right side, close enough that I could see her nod through 2 canopies, and she keyed the radio once, off the record, against about 4 regulations, and said, "Welcome home, skipper." I did not trust my voice to answer for a second. 200 people, 12 aircraft, 7 months. All of them coming home behind me in the dawn. If there is a better feeling available to a human being, I have not found it. And I have looked. I had earned my wings in the year 2008. I had earned my call sign, Vega, on my first combat deployment in 2010. And the story of how a young lieutenant earns a call sign is never flattering, and I will not tell it here. I had been a division lead, a department head, an executive officer, and now a commanding officer. I had spent 9,000 hours of my life learning to do one difficult thing extremely well, and then learning to teach 200 other people to do it and to come home alive. I signed the flight schedule every night of that deployment. That sounds like paperwork, and my father would have called it paperwork. And in a way it was also the single most consequential thing I did each day. Because the flight schedule is a list of which of my people would strap into 40,000 pounds of jet fuel and metal the next day and go do something dangerous over dark water. And the name at the bottom of it was mine, which meant that if it went wrong, the weight of it was mine too. I wrote 3 letters home during those 7 months that I hope you never have to receive. I wrote a dozen more that were only about a sailor being sick, or homesick, or scared. Letters to mothers and husbands, and one to a 9-year-old girl whose father was having a hard time and needed to hear from someone that her dad was brave. That is command. It is not the flying, in the end. The flying is the easy part. Command is being the person whose name is at the bottom of the page when the page is about someone's whole life. None of that was visible from the outside. That is the truth at the center of this whole story. From the outside, I was a tired woman in a green flight suit with her hair pulled back, and a flight suit does not shout. It does not have medals on it. It has a name patch and a set of gold wings, and, on the left shoulder, the patch of the squadron. You have to know how to read it, and my father had spent 42 years making very sure he never learned how. So when the Command Master Chief of my squadron, a man named Everett Cole, called "Attention on deck" from across the hangar floor, my father did not understand what he was hearing. But 200 sailors did. If you have never heard 200 people come to attention at the same instant, I am not sure I can describe the sound of it to you. It is not loud, exactly, It is a single sharp exhalation of a room, a collective settling, hundreds of boot heels finding the deck together and hundreds of spines finding the vertical in the same half second, and then a silence that has weight to it, a silence you can lean against. It is one of the few sounds in the world that is made entirely of discipline. They came up out of their slouch and their laughter and their reunions all at once. A whole hangar of people snapping upright at the same instant, boots settling, chins leveling, hands coming down flat along the seams of their trousers. Father stopped mid-sentence. A child asked a question and was gently hushed, and Master Chief Cole came walking through the parting crowd with his cover under his arm and his eyes fixed on me, and as he came, he spoke again, lower this time, meant for the deck around us. "Skippers on deck," he said. "Make a hole." My father still had my sleeve in his fist. I felt it, and I felt the exact moment his certainty took its first small crack, the way ice cracks a long way off before you hear it. I need to reach back because the word he used did not come from nowhere, and it is important that you understand it was not the first time. I was 18 the night I told them. It was the spring of 2002, and I had a letter on the kitchen table offering me a place in a Navy officer program. And I had another envelope, thicker, from a university with a medical track that my father had been describing to his friends for 2 years, as though I had already graduated from it. I remember the kitchen very clearly. I remember the yellow light over the table, and my mother's good plates, and the way my father set down his fork when I told him which envelope I was going to answer. "You had a future," he said. He did not shout that night either. My father's cruelty was almost never loud. It was quiet and certain, and it went in deeper for being quiet. "You are throwing it in a ditch to go play soldier." My mother tried that night in the small ways she had. After he left the table, she came and sat with me and put her hand over mine and said that he would come around, that he only wanted the best for me, that he was frightened, all the things that mothers say when they have decided that keeping the peace with a difficult man is the same thing as loving their children. I did not know yet that those are not the same thing. I was 18. I believed her. I spent a great deal of the next 20 years believing her, waiting for him to come around, and I want to tell any young person listening that waiting for a certain kind of person to come around is a way of giving them the rest of your life, a day at a time. He did not speak to me for the better part of a year. Not out of rage, out of principle, he would have said. He had decided that I had insulted him by wanting a different life than the one he had drawn for me, and he intended to wait until I came to my senses, and when I did not come to my senses, he simply built a new version of me to live with. In that version, I was not a naval officer. I was a girl who had made a mistake and was too proud to admit it, and everything I did from then on was read through that lens. When I was commissioned, they did not come. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I have had to. There is a ceremony when a person becomes an officer, a small one, and you raise your right hand and you swear an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, and someone who loves you traditionally pins the new bars onto your shoulders. My roommate's father pinned mine on. He was a kind man, a plumber from a town I had never heard of, and he cried doing it, cried for a daughter of his own who was standing next to me, and he pinned my bars on too, because I was standing there with no one. And I have loved that man ever since, and I could not tell you his last name. My own father was 2 states away, not answering, waiting for me to come around. I did not cry at my commissioning. I had already learned by then not to spend tears where they would not be seen, which is a skill, and like most skills that are really wounds, it served me well and cost me something I am still adding up. There was a deployment, and then another, and each time I came home, the story had hardened a little more. My sister married a good man named Kyle and had 2 children and lived 20 minutes from my parents, and she was the success, the one who had done it right, and I was the cautionary tale who sent postcards. At holidays, my father would ask me, in front of everyone, whether I was still doing my little paperwork job on the boat, and I learned that the cheapest thing I could do, the thing that cost the least in the moment, was to smile and say yes and pass the potatoes. There was one Thanksgiving, I think it was the year 2017, when I had just fleeted up to a department head job and I was running the entire operations shop of a squadron, 40 aircrew and their training and their qualifications and their lives, and my father asked me across the turkey, in front of Meredith's in-laws, whom I had just met, whether the Navy had taught me to type yet. Everyone laughed. It was a kind laugh. That was the awful part. They were not being vicious. They genuinely believed I did some small clerical thing, and they thought it was sweet that I stuck with it. And I looked at my own hands on that table, hands that had landed a fighter on a pitching carrier deck at night, which is a thing test pilots will tell you is among the hardest things a human being does. And I said, "Yes, Dad, I can type." And I passed the potatoes. I drove home that night, and I sat in my car in my own driveway for an hour before I could go inside. That was the cost of peace, and I paid it in installments for 2 decades, and the interest kept climbing, and I kept telling myself I could afford it. I told myself I was choosing peace. For a long time, I believed it. It is easier for a family to believe you have failed than to ask what you actually do. Because asking what you actually do means admitting they never bothered to find out, and that is a harder thing to hold than contempt. So they held the contempt, and I let them, and I called my silence maturity. I had made rank in that silence. I had made lieutenant and lieutenant commander, and every promotion was a thing I did not mention at Thanksgiving because mentioning it would have started a fight, and I was so tired of fighting. My mother knew the shape of it, I think. Mothers usually know more than they say, but she had spent 40 years keeping the peace in my father's house, and keeping the peace meant never saying the thing that would make him have to change his mind. So the word parasite did not surprise me. It landed on a bruise that was already there. What surprised me, standing in that hangar, was that for the first time in my life, the room was not on his side. Master Chief Cole reached me and stopped 1 pace away and came to attention, heels together, and it was a beautiful thing to see a man do. 30 years of the Navy in one clean motion, and he did it looking straight at me. "Commander Doyle," he said. "Welcome home, ma'am. The squadron's been holding the deck for you." He said the word, commander, the way you set a heavy thing down on a table so everyone hears it land. He was not a subtle man, Everett Cole, and he had known exactly what he was walking into. Because Master Chiefs always know. They know everything on a deck before the officers do, and he had chosen to walk into it with my rank in his mouth like a flag. I felt my father's hand loosen on my arm. Not release, loosen. The way a thing loosens when the mind behind it stops being sure of what it is holding. He was looking at Cole, and then he was looking at the sailors standing at attention in every direction, and then he was looking at me, and I watched him try to fit what he was seeing into the story he had carried into that building, and I watched the story fail to hold it. Around us the word was moving. I could hear it going out through the crowd the way the quiet had gone out earlier. A low current of it, person to person. That is the skipper, the one he called a parasite. That is their commanding officer. A woman 2 rows back put her hand over her mouth. A chief petty officer I did not recognize. Off from another squadron, turned fully around to look, and when he saw the wings and the command patch, he came to attention too, on his own, because it was the correct thing to do, and he was the kind of man who did the correct thing without being told. I have thought a great deal, since that morning, about how fast a room can change its mind about a person, and about how little the person themselves has to do with it. I had not changed. I was the exact same tired woman in a green flight suit that I had been 90 seconds earlier when my father put his version into the air. Nothing about me had moved. What had moved was the information in the room, and the information had a uniform on it and 30 years of Navy in its voice. And a room will believe a command master chief standing at attention faster than it will believe an angry old man. Because deep down, a crowd knows the difference between a person who is telling you what is true and a person who is telling you what he needs to be true. My father had been telling them what he needed to be true. Cole had simply told them what was. Phones that had been half raised came down. My sister's mouth was open. My mother had lifted her eyes off the floor at last. "At ease," I said to Cole, quietly, because 200 people cannot stand at attention forever, and because it was my deck, and setting them at ease was mine to do. "Thank you, Master Chief." "Ma'am," he said, and he stepped to the side, and he did not go far. He planted himself at my right shoulder and half a step back, which is where a command master chief stands when he has decided that his officer is going to need a wall behind her, and he folded his hands in front of him, and he watched my father with the flat, patient expression of a man who has thrown drunks out of better places than this. I had never seen that before, not once. My father was a man with an answer for everything, And the answers came fast, and they came certain, and they landed wherever they would do the most to reestablish that he was the one in the room who understood how the world worked. He had an answer for my career, and an answer for my choices, and an answer for what my life had amounted to. And he had never in 42 years lacked one. Now he stood on a painted concrete deck with a command master chief planted at my shoulder and 200 sailors settling back to attention out of the corners of his vision. And the machine that had always produced his certainty simply failed to turn over. I watched him reach for the answer and come back with nothing. It was not satisfying, the way I had always imagined it would be. It was almost frightening, the way it is frightening to see a strong thing you have organized your whole life around suddenly reveal that it was never as solid as it made you believe. My father looked at me. For the first time that I could remember in my adult life, he did not have anything ready to say. And here's the strange part, the part I am not proud of. Even then, even with the deck at my back and the truth finally standing up in the light, I felt the old pull. It came up out of nowhere, and it was as strong as it had ever been. It said quietly, in a voice I knew very well, because it had been my own for 30 years, "Make this smaller. Look how embarrassed he is. Look at your mother's face. You could fix this. You could laugh it off. Tell everyone he's just tired. Tell the Master Chief. It's fine. Put your arm around your father and walk him out to the parking lot and let everyone keep the comfortable version of all of you. You are so good at this. You have been doing it your whole life. Absorb it. That is your job." It was Meredith who nearly made me do it. She stepped in the way she always stepped in, quick and low, angling her body to put herself between me and the watching crowd. And she reached out and touched my wrist, and she said, fast and soft, Okay, this is a lot. Dad didn't mean it like that. Can we just not do this here? Please. Not in front of everybody. Not in front of everybody. There it was. The oldest job I had ever held. Not commanding officer. Peacekeeper. The one who eats it so the family does not have to look at itself. Meredith was not being cruel. That is what I want you to understand. She genuinely believed she was helping, because in our family the crisis was never the insult. The crisis was always the scene, and the scene was always my fault for not letting the insult slide. I looked at her hand on my wrist, and then I looked past her, out at the deck at the 200 people who had just come to attention on my account. There was a young airman near the front, could not have been 20, standing straight with his mother beside him, and he was looking at me the way you look at someone you have decided to believe in, and I realized that if I shrank now, if I made myself small to spare my father a bad afternoon, I would not only be betraying myself, I would be betraying every one of them. I would be teaching that boy that his skipper folds, that the uniform he had just put on is a thing you apologize for at the first sign of a family's displeasure. There is a phrase we use, and it has become a cliché because it is true so often that people forget it means anything, and the phrase is that we do not leave anyone behind. It is not a slogan when you have actually done it. It is a promise you make with your body, in weather, at night, when it would be so much easier and safer to write someone off, and you go back anyway because the promise is the only thing holding the whole enterprise together. Because a force that leaves its people behind is not a force. It is just a crowd with weapons. I had spent 7 months teaching 200 people that we do not leave anyone behind. I had said it to that young airman's face in a passageway once when he wanted to quit. I had meant it with everything I had. I was not going to stand in that hangar and leave myself behind to make my father comfortable. If I did, every word I had ever said to my sailors about not folding, about standing your ground, about the difference between the easy thing and the right thing, would have been a lie told by a woman who folded the first time her own father raised his voice in public. They were watching. That boy was watching. And more than any of them, some version of the 18-year-old at the yellow kitchen table was watching. The one who had learned to swallow it, and I found that I could not, would not, teach her the old lesson one more time. For the first time in my life, the cost of silence was higher than the cost of the truth. I made the decision the way I have learned to make the ones that matter, which is without any spectacle at all. I did not yank my arm free. I reached across with my other hand, and I lifted my father's fingers off my sleeve. Gently, one motion, the way you lift a child's hand off a hot stove, firm and kind and final. And I set his hand back down at his own side. I did not do it to shame him. I did it because it was time, at 42 years of age, to stop carrying his grip on my arm as though it were a thing I deserved. "It's all right, Meredith," I said. And I meant it. I was not angry at her. I moved half a step to my left, out from behind her sheltering shoulder, to where the deck could see me, and I could see the deck, and I let them. Then I turned to Cole. "As you were, Master Chief," I said. "Stand the squadron down. They've earned their families. Thank you for keeping the deck for me." I saw my father flinch at the word skipper, the small involuntary flinch of a man hearing, for the fourth or fifth time in as many minutes, a piece of language that did not fit anywhere inside the story he had brought into that building. Skipper. It is an old word, a warm one, the word a crew uses for the one person who is responsible for all of them, and it carries an affection that no rank insignia can. His sailors called me Skipper. Not the boss, not the commander, not ma'am, though they use those too. Skipper. It is a word you have to earn from below, and it cannot be ordered, and it cannot be bought, and it certainly cannot be inherited, and my father had just heard 200 people use it about the daughter he had introduced to a hangar as a parasite. I do not think there is a dictionary in the world that could have taught him what that one word meant faster than standing in that room did. "Aye, Skipper," he said, and there was something in the corner of his mouth that on another man would have been a smile. He turned and he made a small circular motion with one hand, wind it down, and the hangar came back to life around us in a slow, warm roar. Families folding back into families, the band finding its way back into a song. But the ring around us stayed a little clearer than it had been, because a crowd knows when a thing is not finished. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it was not triumph. People imagine that the reveal, the turn, the moment the truth stands up, must feel like winning. It did not feel like winning. It felt like setting down something I had been carrying so long that my body had stopped noticing the weight, and the strange lightness afterward was almost frightening. I did not need my father to fall. That is the thing I understood, standing there with his hand back at his own side. For 30 years, I had half believed that the only way I would ever be free of the small version of me was for him to be publicly, completely wrong, for the whole world to see it, and for him to be crushed under it. And now the whole world was seeing it, and I discovered that I did not want him crushed at all. I only needed to stop holding him up. For 30 years, I had been the beam that kept his idea of himself standing, the disappointing daughter whose failure made his own choices look wise. And a man will lean his whole weight on a story like that without ever knowing he is leaning. When I stepped out from behind Meredith's shoulder and set his hand back at his side and stood where my deck could see me, I was not pushing him down. I was only, at long last, stepping out from under him, and if he could not stand on his own after that, then that was a thing about him and not a thing about me, and it had taken me 42 years and a hangar full of sailors to understand the difference. The crowd near the main doors shifted, and a different kind of quiet moved through it. The quiet that follows a senior officer the way a wake follows a ship. Rear Admiral Harold Merrick came through the doors of that hangar in his service dress, 2 stars on each shoulder board catching the light, and the deck rearranged itself around him without a word being spoken. I had known Harold Merrick for 16 years. He had been my first squadron's operations officer when I was a brand new lieutenant, and he had been the one who pinned my call sign on me. And he had signed the fitness reports that carried me from lieutenant to command, and there is no one alive, my own mother included, who has watched my career more closely or understood it better. He was the strike group commander now. He had come, he told me later, simply to welcome his squadrons home, the way he always did. And he had walked into the last thing he expected to see. He crossed the floor toward me, and the crowd made a hole for him the way it had made a hole for Cole. And he did not slow down when he reached my father, did not even fully register him because he had eyes only for me. He put out his hand and I took it, and he shook it once, hard, the way he shakes the hand of someone he respects. "Best stick I ever had in my ready room," he said, loud enough, because Harold Merrick has never in his life said a kind thing quietly. "And now the best skipper on this waterfront. It is good to have you home, Vega." "Thank you, sir," I said. "It's good to be home." My father made a sound. It was not a word at first. Then it resolved into one. "Yo, Skipper," he said. He was looking at the Admiral and then at me, and his face had gone a color I had never seen on it. She commands this?" Merrick turned his head and looked at my father for the first time, and I saw him take the measure of the situation in about a second and a half, the way flag officers do, and I saw him decide how to handle it. He could have been cruel. He had the standing and the reason. He chose instead to simply tell the truth, which was worse, because the truth left nowhere to stand. "She commands all of it, sir," Merrick said. 200 sailors, 12 aircraft, 7 months at sea in some of the worst water on the planet, and she brought every single one of them home. Do you know your daughter at all? I should tell you something about Harold Merrick so that you understand why that question landed the way it did. He is not a sentimental man. Flag officers rarely are. The job sands it off them. In 16 years, I had seen him praise people perhaps a dozen times, and every time it had been precise and earned and brief, because he understood that praise inflates and loses value if you print too much of it. So when Harold Merrick crossed a hangar and called me the best skipper on the waterfront in front of 200 strangers, the sailors in that room knew exactly what it was worth, because they knew him too, and they knew he did not spend words like that. That is why the room went so still. It was not the 2 stars. It was that the 2 stars had bent down to pick me up, publicly, and everyone who understood the Navy understood what that meant. He did not say it as an insult. He said it as a genuine question, the way you would ask a man if he knew the value of the thing he was standing on. And my father, who had always had an answer, who had built his whole life on being the one at the table who knew, opened his mouth and found that he did not have one. The word parasite was still hanging in the air of that hangar, and the room had just answered it completely, and my father had heard the answer, and there was nothing left for him to say. What happened next happened slowly, and it happened mostly in silence, and it moved through my family the way cold moves through a house when a door has been left open. My father did not get smaller because I made him smaller. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. I did not say a single word to cut him down. I did not need to. He got smaller because the room had finally become the correct size, and in a room, the correct size, he could be seen for exactly what he was, which was a proud, frightened old man who had spent his daughter's whole life protecting himself from the possibility that he had been wrong about her. He stood inside a loose circle of sailors who now knew, every one of them, precisely what he had called their commanding officer. And he could feel them knowing it. That is a specific kind of exposure, and there is no uniform for it. My mother had come up beside him and taken his arm, not to restrain him, I think, but to hold on to something, and her face had broken in a way I had not seen since her own mother's funeral. Meredith stood a little apart, and the half-smile was gone, and in its place was the look of a person watching a story they have told their whole life come apart in their hands. Merrick stayed a few minutes. He is good at exactly this, at knowing when a moment needs a senior presence and when it needs him to step back. And he spent those minutes doing the thing that great commanders do, which is to make himself briefly ordinary. He asked me about the transit. He asked, by name, about 2 of my department heads, because he keeps a running ledger of good officers in his head the way other men keep sports statistics. He told me the strike group would want a full debrief on the 3rd week, and then he told me to take my leave first and mean it. And then he shook my hand again, and he turned to go. On his way out, he stopped in front of my father one more time, and he did not say anything cruel. He simply looked at him for a moment, a long, level, unhurried look, the look of a man filing something away. And then he put on his cover and walked out into the gray. And my father watched him go, like a man watching the tide take something he had dropped. A woman I did not know came up to me then, out of the crowd, middle-aged in a good coat, with the particular nervous dignity of a parent at a military event. She had a young man beside her, one of my sailors, a second-class petty officer named Ruiz, whom I knew well, and she took my hand in both of hers. "You're the skipper," she said. "You're Commander Doyle. My son writes home about you. He says you know all of them, he says." Her voice caught. "He was sick, at sea, a few months ago, real sick, and he says you wrote to us. You found time to write to us about our boy. I have the letter on the refrigerator. Thank you, Commander. Thank you for bringing him home." I remembered the letter. I remembered the night I wrote it, at 0200 in my stateroom, with the ship rolling, because a mother 8,000 miles away was frightened, and a few sentences from me might let her sleep. It had cost me 20 minutes of a sleep I could not spare. It was the easiest 20 minutes I ever spent. My mother heard every word of it. I watched her hear it. And I watched her turn and look at me as though I were a stranger she should have known for 42 years, a stranger she had lived in the same house with, and never once thought to ask a single real question. And I saw in her face the beginning of a grief that had nothing to do with anyone dying. Petty Officer Ruiz stood there through all of it, red to the ears, mortified in the specific way a young man is mortified when his mother tells his boss he is a good boy. But he did a thing then that I will not forget. He came to attention, right there in his civilian clothes on his day of homecoming, and he said, "Ma'am, this is my mom," as if to place himself formally on my side of the line, and then he said to his mother, quiet, but I heard it, "I told you she was the real thing. I have been given a great many decorations in my career. I have a shadow box at home with ribbons in it that cost people a great deal. I'm not sure any of it has meant as much to me as a 23-year-old sailor telling his mother on the worst social morning of my life that his skipper was the real thing." My father heard it too. He was still standing where I'd set his hand back at his side, and he had nowhere to look, and so he looked at his own daughter being thanked by a stranger for keeping her son alive, and I could see him doing a terrible arithmetic, adding up all the years he had spent certain that I did nothing, and finding that the sum did not come out the way he had always assumed it would. There is a particular silence a proud man makes when he is recalculating his entire understanding of a person in real time. It is not a comfortable silence to stand next to, even when the person he underestimated is you. The crowd thinned, the way homecoming crowds do, families peeling away to cars and restaurants in the long, ordinary afternoons they had been waiting 7 months to have. The band packed up. The big hangar doors stood open on a gray, bright sky, and the jets sat cooling in their row, ticking, and the deck emptied until it was mostly just the squadron's own people, breaking down the last of the banners and folding the tables. I found a quiet place, along the wall, near a workbench, and I stood there for a minute with my back against the cool metal and let myself feel how tired I was. Cole drifted over, because Cole always drifts over, and he stood next to me and looked out at the deck and did not say anything for a while. "You good, Skipper?" he asked finally. "I'm good, Master Chief," I told him. It was mostly true, which at sea is what we call good enough to continue. Because here's the thing that no one tells you about the moment the truth finally stands up. It does not undo the years. Harold Merrick calling me the best skipper on the waterfront in front of 200 people did not reach back through time and give me a father who had asked, when I was 26, what a call sign was. It did not give me the Thanksgivings where I might have talked about my work instead of eating my food in silence. The recognition was real, and it was sweet, and it was, in its way, complete. And it sat next to a loss that was just as real, and the two of them did not cancel out. They just stood there together, the way the sweet and the bitter always stand together in the things that actually matter. That is the cost. Being right does not make you whole. I had been right for 30 years, right about myself, right about the life I chose, and being right had kept me company on a lot of cold flight decks, and it had never once been the same thing as being known by the people whose knowing I wanted most. I stood against that workbench, and I let myself feel the whole shape of it, the sweet and the bitter both. Because I have learned that if you do not let yourself feel a thing all the way through in the moment it happens, it does not leave. It just goes below the waterline and waits for you, and things that wait for you below the waterline are the ones that eventually take the ship down. So I felt it. I felt the enormous, quiet satisfaction of having stood my ground without raising my hand. And underneath it, I felt the grief of a girl at a yellow kitchen table who had wanted, more than she ever admitted, for her father to look at her once the way that Admiral had just looked at her. Both were true. Neither one canceled the other. That is what the grown-up version of a happy ending actually looks like in my experience. It is not the bad thing being erased. It is the good thing arriving anyway, and being strong enough to hold them both at the same time, one in each hand, and keep walking. Cole and I stood there a while longer without talking. That is one of the great mercies of the people you serve with, that they can stand next to you in a hard silence and not need to fill it, because they have stood next to you in worse. He had been in the Navy for 31 years. He had buried friends. He had a daughter of his own, he told me once, whom he had not spoken to in some time. And I have always wondered whether he thought about her that morning, watching me and my father, whether he was doing some arithmetic of his own along the back wall of that hangar. I did not ask. Some doors you leave for a man to open himself. "For what it's worth, Skipper," he said after a while, still looking out at the deck. "The whole squadron saw it, and the whole squadron would follow you into anything after today. Not because of the Admiral. Because of how you stood there." He paused. "My money was on you the second he grabbed your arm. Grew up with a man like that. You can always tell the ones who are going to hold." I did not have an answer for that. I put my hand on his shoulder for a second, which is not regulation, and neither of us cared, and he let me. I was thinking about that when I saw my father coming across the deck toward me, alone, unsteady, an old man walking a very long way across an empty hangar to reach his daughter. My mother stood back by the doors and watched him go, and did not follow. He stopped in front of me. Cole, without a word, straightened off the wall and walked a few paces away to give us the room, though not so far that he could not get back. My father looked at me. He looked at the wings on my chest, at the command patch, at the eagle he had not known how to read. His hands were shaking slightly. "I didn't know," he said. "All this time." His voice did something I had never heard it do. "I should have asked." I did not answer him right away. I have learned that the important things do not need to be answered quickly, and that the silence you leave is often more honest than anything you could put into it. I should have asked 3 words. I'm sorry, not exactly. And I noticed that, and a younger version of me would have held it against him, would have counted the missing words and found the apology insufficient. But I was 42 and I had signed too many hard letters and buried too much to spend what was left of my life auditing other people's apologies for completeness. He was not a man who had ever known how to say he was sorry. I should have asked was the largest thing he had ever managed to give me, and I could see what it cost him, and I decided to receive it as what it was, rather than resent it for what it was not. We stood there together under the open doors, with the jets cooling behind us, and I found the first true things either of us had said to the other in a very long time. "You could have," I said. "Any time in 20 years you could have asked. I would have told you anything you wanted to know. I was not cruel about it. I said it the way you read a position report, plainly, a statement of where we actually were. I'm not going to pretend today fixed something, Dad. It didn't. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life angry at you. I don't have the room for it. I fly for a living. I can't carry that weight into the cockpit." He nodded. I do not think he fully understood the part about the cockpit, but he understood that I was setting something down. And he understood that it was a mercy. And he had the grace, for once, not to reach for the last word. My mother came then. She crossed the deck slowly, and she stopped a few feet away, and she looked at me, and her eyes were full, and she said, "Will you tell me? About it. All of it. I want." She pressed her lips together. "I have missed so much. I want to know my daughter." And that, of everything that was said in that hangar on that gray morning, that was the thing that nearly took my legs out from under me. Not the Admiral, not the Master Chief, not the 200 people at attention. My mother, at 66 years old, asking to know me. I had built a whole life out of not needing that. You learn to, in this business. You learn to carry your own morale, to be your own next of kin in the ways that count, to find your family in the ready room and the chief's mess and the people who will actually come when you call. And it is a good life, a full one, and I would not trade it. But there is a thing that lives underneath even the fullest life. A small, unfinished thing. And for me, it had always been shaped like my mother's attention, and I had told myself for 20 years that I had stopped wanting it. Standing in that hangar, I found out that I had not stopped wanting it at all. I had only stopped asking. There is a difference, and the difference is where a lot of us live. I did not fling the door open, and I did not slam it shut. I have watched too many people do both, and both are ways of pretending the situation is simpler than it is. I told my mother yes. Yes, I would tell her. Not all at once, because you cannot pour 20 years through a doorway in an afternoon, but yes. I told Meredith, when she came over with her eyes red and an apology half formed on her mouth, that I did not need her apology, that I needed something harder and better than an apology, which was for her to stop telling the small story about me to her children and to herself, starting now. She said she would. I believe she meant it. Meaning it and doing it are different distances, and time would show me which one this was, and I found I could live with not knowing yet. Meredith and I had been close, once, when we were small, before the family sorted us into the success and the disappointment and handed us our scripts. I had not hated her for playing her part. It is hard to refuse a role your family is desperate to give you. and the role of the good daughter is a gilded cage, but it is still warm, and I understood why she had stayed in it. What I told her, standing on that hangar floor, was that her sons were old enough now to hear the true version, and that the true version would serve them better than the comfortable one. "Tell them they're ant flies fighters off of ships," I said. "Tell them she is the boss of 200 people. Tell them she got there by doing the hardest thing she could find and not quitting when her own family told her to." That is a better story to give a kid than the one you have been telling, and it has the added benefit of being real. She laughed, wet and surprised, and said that her oldest would lose his mind, that he had no idea, and I said, well, that is rather the point, and for a moment, one clean moment, she was my sister again, and not my understudy in a play about my failure. To my father I gave the least, and I gave it on purpose, because he had earned the least, and because too much grace given too fast is not grace. It is just another way of teaching someone that the price of hurting you is nothing. I told him this. I said, I am not asking you to be proud of me. Pride you have to earn the right to, and you have not done the work yet. I am asking you to be honest about who I am. That is the only version of me I will answer to now. If you can't be honest, that's a choice you get to make, and I'll love you from a distance and I'll come to the funerals. But I'm done being the family's small story. I retired that today, on this deck, in front of my whole squadron. It's not coming back. He took it. He did not argue. Perhaps for the first time in his life, my father heard the terms and did not try to renegotiate them. And there was something in his stillness that I chose to read as the beginning of respect, though I did not need it to be. And that was the difference. I no longer needed it to be anything. I want to be careful here, because I know how these stories are supposed to end, and I am not going to lie to you to make it end that way. My father did not become a different man on that hangar floor. People do not, at 68, undergo a conversion because their daughter turned out to be someone. What happened was smaller and more real than a conversion. A crack opened in a thing that had been sealed shut for 40 years, and light got in, and whether he chose to widen that crack or plaster over it again was going to be the work of whatever years he had left. And it was going to be his work, not mine. I had spent too long doing the emotional labor of that family single-handed. I was setting the tools down. If he wanted a relationship with the actual me, the real one, the one with the wings and the command and the hard edges the Navy had put on me, then he knew now where I stood and what it would cost, and the next move was his to make or not make. That is a harder ending than forgiveness on the spot. It is also the only honest one I have. Forgiveness that costs nothing and asks nothing is just a way of volunteering for the next round. What I offered him instead was a door with my name on it, my real name and my real rank, and a clear sign on it that said, "This is who lives here now, and no smaller version is coming back to make it easier for you. Come in honestly or stand in the yard." Both were allowed. Only the pretending was over. Before we left, I did one more thing, and I did it on purpose, and I want to tell you about it because it is the part I am proudest of. I found Master Chief Cole, where he was supervising the last of the breakdown, and I brought my mother over, and I introduced them. "Mom," I said, "this is Command Master Chief Cole. He runs my squadron's enlisted sailors. There is nothing that happens on my deck that he does not know about first, and there is no one I trust more." And I watched my mother shake the hand of a man who had spent the morning being a wall at my back. And I watched Cole be gracious to her, the way senior chiefs are gracious to the mothers of their officers, courtly and warm and slightly formal, and I thought, this is my family too. This one I chose. I wanted my mother to see it. I wanted her to understand that the daughter she thought had been alone all these years had in fact been surrounded the whole time by people who would walk into fire for her, and that she had missed all of them by never once asking who I flew with. We walked out together, the four of us, into the gray light. My mother put her arm through mine, and I walked her out under the wing of one of my jets, a machine she had never known her daughter flew, and I watched her look up at the great gray shape of it, at the missiles inert on the rails, and the tailhook, and the name stenciled under the canopy that happened, that day, to be mine. And I watched her understand a little more of who I had been all the years she was not looking. The door was open. I had not forced it. I had simply stopped holding it shut against the possibility that they might, this late, decide to walk through. I want to talk to you now, directly, because I suspect some of you have been standing in a version of that hangar for a long time. Maybe not a hangar, maybe a kitchen or a wedding or a holiday table or a hospital waiting room. Maybe you are the one in your family who took the harder, quieter road, the road that does not photograph well and does not explain itself in a sentence. And maybe the people who were supposed to know you best decided a long time ago that the road you took was a road down, and they have been narrating your life to you ever since as a story of decline. Maybe you have spent years being the family disappointment, the cautionary tale, the one they worry about at the dinner table. And maybe, like me, you got so tired of fighting the story that you started letting them tell it, and you called your silence peace. Hear me, because I paid for this, and I am giving it to you for free. You do not owe anyone the small version of yourself. You never did. The peace you buy by shrinking is not peace, it is a loan, and the interest on it is your whole life. You can stop paying it. You do not have to do it loudly, and you do not have to do it cruelly, and you certainly do not have to wait for an admiral to walk through a door and say the true thing out loud for you. You only have to stop holding up the version of you that was never real. Stand where your people can see you. Do the work, keep your dignity, tell the truth about who you are, and then let the truth do the rest. And here's the part people miss, the part that took me 42 years to understand. So let me save you some of the time. Standing where your people can see you is not the same thing as revenge, and it is so much better than revenge, because revenge keeps you tied to the person who hurt you. Revenge is a leash you hold that is also holding you. I could have spent that morning destroying my father. I had the whole arsenal in my hands. An admiral had just handed me the high ground, and 200 witnesses were standing on it with me. I could have made him beg. And if I had, I would have walked out of that hangar still bound to him, still defined by him, still the disappointing daughter, only now the disappointing daughter who got even, which is just the same cage with the paint scratched. Instead, I set his hand down at his side, and I stopped holding him up, and I turned to my own people, and I walked out free. That is the difference between vengeance and justice. Vengeance is about them. Justice is simply the truth, finally allowed to weigh what it actually weighs. One of them keeps you, the other one lets you go. So do not wait for your hangar. Do not wait for the admiral. Most of us never get the 200 sailors and the 2 stars walking through the door at the exact right moment. And if you spend your life waiting for the universe to stage your vindication for you, you will wait it out entirely. You do not need the audience. You only need to stop telling the small story about yourself and stop letting anyone else tell it either. Stand up straight in the life you actually built. That is the whole of it. Because the truth will do the rest. That is the last thing I learned on that deck. And it is the truest thing I know. An insult is a loud, fast, cheap thing. And it feels enormous in the moment it lands. But the truth is patient, and the truth is heavy. And the truth does not need to raise its voice. In any room, given long enough, the truth outranks the insult. Every time I flew home, they called me a parasite. And then 200 sailors stood up. I am Commander Doyle. Thank you for standing the deck with me.